We're going to start today's video with a brief definition of what we mean when we say rule of cool. Rule of cool means the players want to do something cool, and I know that's not how the rules work, but I don't care. For example, I once guest starred in a friend's game as a wild magic sorcerer, but I got taken out in the first round of combat, and I just lay there unconscious and bleeding. And my DM felt really bad about the fact that I came in to play one session of this game and all I wanted to do was have some cool, fun, wild magic options, and then I didn't get to do anything. So he ruled that because I was unconscious and not in control, my wild magic was just going off constantly. So I would roll on the wild magic chart every turn that I was unconscious. Now that was a rare situation where the DM actually suggested the action that rule of cool would cover. But more often the players will suggest something that they'd like to do that does not fit into the rules of the game. One thing I discovered while doing research online for this video is nobody talking about this online is using the same definition. I know it shouldn't be shocking that people talking about this online are not on the same page, but here we are. I saw one example saying that halfling barbarians would normally have disadvantage using heavy weapons, but the DM ignored it because rule of cool. Yeah, okay, that's a good example. I don't actually know for sure that that is how the rules work. I think it is, but either way, who cares? That's true, that's rule of cool. But another person online pointed to Matt Mercer's "How do you want to do this?" prompts when a player gets a kill on a bad guy, and said that asking players to describe their kills was rule of cool. And I mean, kind of, I guess. I mean, it's about doing something that is not in the rules because it is cooler to do it this way. But how you want to do this is not about breaking the rules to do something cool, which I think is the definition of rule of cool that I find the most useful. And this doesn't have to be the case. Of course, you and your fellow players may have no idea whether something is against the rules or not. After all, you don't have to memorize every rule in the game. But that sort of reinforces my point. Rule of cool puts a cool cinematic moment ahead of the rules. To quote another example I found online, rewarding a high athletics roll by allowing a paladin to swim up a waterfall, that's definitely rule of cool. So now that we hopefully have agreed on that definition, let's get into the useful questions. For most DMs, the big question is how often to employ rule of cool. After all, if you're running a gritty survival game, rule of cool does not make a lot of sense. But if you're running a game that is much closer in tone to, say, a Fast and Furious movie, then everything should be rule of cool. Personally, I'm somewhere in the middle. I really enjoy having fun cinematic moments occasionally. I think spacing them out makes them feel more special. But I also like D&D 5th edition, and I like the system it uses to reconcile things by default. So there are plenty of times when the rules do the work for me, and I don't need to use rule of cool to let the players do cool things. But sometimes I use a middle ground approach as well. In between rule of cool, just do it, and no, that's not how the rules work, there's this technique. Now, some groups don't need that. They're totally fine using rule of cool a few times every session and it suits their style. But I personally prefer that those cool moments are exceptions, because I find the D&D 5th edition system works pretty well for my storytelling sensibilities. And this technique helps me fill in the gaps when the players want to do something cool. And it's not in the rules, but I want them to be able to do it, but I don't want it to be easy or free. Now, sometimes you can just adjudicate this by calling for a roll of whatever ability or skill seems most appropriate, but other times that might not suit the situation. So instead, I'll ask the player to spend a resource. I developed this approach when I was working on the Friday Night Quests D&D podcast. Even before I was the DM of that show, there would be times when a player character would take a ton of damage, and our fighter, Jeremy Fox, asked if he could take the damage instead. He had the protection fighting style, and it was very important to him and to his character concept that he might be able to step in front of his allies and take the damage on their behalf. So important that he often referred to his character as a protection fighter, like as if that was his subclass. And so this request, whenever it came up, was an extension of that. Now, had I been the DM at the time, I'm not exactly sure what I would have done. This is not me trying to armchair quarterback what our DM did. This is me wondering, how would I handle that if it was my player? And there are a few options. One, you could just say yes, but that can be an issue for a few reasons. Giving one player the option to take away the damage dealt to the wizard anytime they ask radically changes their tactics in combat. Although as the person playing the wizard, I was always extremely grateful, I can also appreciate that as a DM, that would provide a whole host of other challenges. It also means that one of his fighting styles, the protection fighting style, would ultimately become irrelevant. After all, what would it matter if you impose disadvantage on an enemy attacking your friend if you can just absorb that damage instead? The second approach is you could make it dependent on a roll. This may have actually been what we did. I don't remember how we reconciled it, but this might have been the solution. And it makes sense. You're essentially asking him to roll to see if he can get his body in between the enemy and the ally in time to absorb the attack. And if this happened at your table, that approach might work fine for you and for your table. But for me, and this is completely personal, I prefer not to see whether or not something is possible, but to put a cost in front of the players and then to see whether they still want to go with that cool option now that there is a drawback. Then, once you see that this is something they'll ask for multiple times, once it becomes a pattern and it's something that they definitely want to do, you can introduce a magic item to give them that power. And now you've taken away the drawback and rewarded them for having made that choice initially. And full disclosure, this is honestly the most armchair quarterback answer. But of course, in the year of our Lord 2022, I've been playing D&D for much longer now. So I have a slightly better sense of how magic items could be employed in a game, and what powers I can steal or invent to create a cool magic item. I also have the advantage of, a lot more D&D books have come out since then. So if this particular example happened at my table these days, I would probably take the Rune Knight's ability to redirect damage and then put that on a shield and give that to the fighter. But I may want to modify it slightly. I know it should require a reaction, but he also has the protection fighting style that's also a reaction. And again, using this power would make the protection fighting style irrelevant. But there also might be times that he'd want to use both on the same turn. How do you reconcile that? So I might say this is something he could use once per day, but he could still use it as part of his protection fighting style. If he tried to use his protection fighting style and give an enemy disadvantage on attacking an ally right next to him, and that enemy's attack still managed to get through and hit the ally, then as part of that reaction, I would allow him once a day to use the shield to absorb the damage instead. But what if he already has a dope shield? And even if you do plan to give him this shield at some point in the future, what do you do right now when he's asking if he can do something cool? Well, that's when we get to option 4. Ask the players to spend a resource. In our fighter example, they're already taking damage if they get what they asked for. So I wouldn't ask them to sacrifice anything crazy like a hit die or an action surge. But you might decide that a better trade-off is that the enemy is going to deal max damage, or roll damage with the effects of a critical hit. Because you don't care about reactions, you just want to make sure that this moment matters. Not just due to the fact that the fighter is taking this hit because they know they have the hit points to spare, and you want to make sure it's actually making a dent in their vast sea of hit points. Or mechanically because you feel that someone who is a willing target, someone who is not trying to deflect the attack, is basically wide open to taking as much damage as possible. But also, this could be an awesome cinematic moment. Someone throwing themselves in front of another blade and taking the hit. And when that happens, it should feel like a big choice. But make sure your players know what the cost would be when they ask. That way, they have to commit to a course of action knowing what the consequence will be. This is not a bad piece of advice in D&D in general, but in this situation, it's essential. Honestly, the challenge of this technique is just trying to figure out what resource you can ask your players to spend. Everyone might have a different answer for that. It depends on your style, which rules of D&D are most important to you, and what behavior you want to reward. Hit dice, spell slots, reactions, action surges, movement, higher level spell slots, maybe even sacrificing their next turn. There are a ton of options, and they all depend on your style of play and the context of the moment. As long as you tell the players what the cost would be before they commit to the action, it can be anything you want. And feel free to adjust as you go. Maybe at first you feel like sacrificing a reaction is enough for the fighter jumping in front of the blade, but over time you realize it should have a different effect. So the next time you ask, just say, since it looks like this is happening more often, I think there should be a larger consequence to leaping in front of the attack. If you want to do this again in the future, it won't just cost your reaction, it will also draw aggro from the other enemies. You're making yourself a target to a lot of them because they've seen you be selfless, and they know you're a problem for them if you keep doing that. So if you want, you can do this some more going forward, but that's going to be the new consequence. Now, I personally wouldn't suggest doing anything that extreme because I feel like it would ward my players away from that behavior in the future. And that's not really my goal with this. I don't want to make them never do it again, I just want it to feel important. But that might be the effect that you want. You don't want any of these to become the new recurring tool in their toolbox because you want them to be exclusive to these one-time cinematic moments. So a much higher cost, especially the next time they try to do it, might make perfect sense. Or maybe this wouldn't scare off your player at all. After all, I don't think it would have scared Jeremy off from doing it. In a recent Curse of Strahd game, the Bard healed the Barbarian, But we all knew that the monster would have a chance to act before the barbarian's next turn. So she was about to take a ton of damage before she had a chance to go into her rage and start halving the damage. So the bard asked if the barbarian could go into a rage on the bard's turn rather than waiting for her own. Now, that's 1000% not how the game works, but I thought it was a really clever solution to the problem they were about to face. So before I could answer, the bard made a pitch. Maybe instead of inspiring the barbarian and giving them a d8 to roll in the future, they could spend that bardic inspiration die now so the barbarian could go into a rage instead. And it's exactly what I was going to suggest. We were several sessions in, and they knew my style at this point. So now instead of just asking me if they could do dope stuff, they were offering trades they could make. That's how I know the system is working. It's not holding back the players from asking to try cool things, but it's inspiring creativity. That's also why I hand out inspiration so often in my games, and I don't limit the number of inspiration points any player can have. It's a resource they can spend that doesn't upset the balance of the game design. And by giving it out, I can reward the players for other behavior, like role-playing or creative problem-solving. And being able to use them as a resource to do cool stuff is exactly why I give it to them in the first place. When I started DMing Friday Night Quests, I told the cast that they could use inspiration points to, quote, do cool stuff. Some of the players had follow-up questions asking how they worked and what the limits were, but not Jeremy Fox. He understood exactly the kind of stuff I had in mind, and I could tell that he knew this resource would be extremely useful in trying to execute some of the cool things he wanted to do in a combat. It's gotten to the point these days where I give out 2 or 3 inspiration points every session, which is a lot, especially since I'm fine with my players having more than one inspiration at a time and carrying them across multiple sessions. But I do that because I know my players will use inspiration. Sometimes they'll use them as intended by the game designers as a way to give themselves advantage on a roll, or more accurately to give themselves a reroll, since that's how a lot of tables rule it, and ours does the same. When a player is making an important roll, other players will open up the discussion to see if anybody has an inspiration that player can use on this roll. Even when it's not their turn, the entire party is focused on the success of the team. And so these inspiration points have almost become a party resource. But also, having that resource means that the party can sometimes use them to do dope stuff. And that helps make my games more cinematic. But that's part of my style, and it might not be right for you. And you might go in the comments and say that this can't work because of how it affects other aspects of the game, things that I couldn't possibly have considered by now. And in your games, that might very well be true. Not every D&D game is the same. That's not how it works. But for my games and how I run my tables, it works like a dream. The genie bows to you all. Dudes, thank you so much for saving my life and bringing me back to my family's palace on the elemental plane of fire. If there's any favor I can ask before I magically teleport you back home, you just name it. Actually, could you take us to my hometown? It's on this plane. Oh, that's right, you're a fire genasi. Oh, that's right, you're a fire genasi. Oh God, they want to go to a town in the elemental plane of fire. They have a genie who can get them there instantly. He owes them a favor. I have nothing prepped. God, they're so excited. Can I end the session early? No, we've been playing for 20 minutes. That's too soon. Wait! I can use Describe. They have more than 7,000 scenes of places, monsters, and spells, and their team of professional writers add more all the time. The scenes can be read aloud at your table, especially when your party goes somewhere or does something completely without warning. They have a tag feature, so I can use keywords to track down the scene options that work best. By selecting Plane of Fire, I get all of those scenes that match that term. And then I add City, and I find a few results for a city in the Plane of Fire. Wow, this one looks perfect. As you approach the Sultan City in the elemental plane of fire, the domed dwellings and soaring spires of the city blaze in the heat of the incessant suns high above. The entirety of the metropolis, sprawling for leagues in all directions, shines gold, copper, bronze, and brass, metal as far as the eye can see, radiating heat. The streets teem with crimson-skinned Ifrit, and numerous smithies ring out with the sounds of hammers and anvils. What do you do? Also, this happened to me. This happened in one of my games, and I didn't know about Describe. So I didn't have anything I could do about it. But you do know about Describe. You can sign up. You can make sure it doesn't happen to you. Visit describe.com/supergeek and use the code supergeek at checkout to get 10% off of your first subscription payment. That's dscryb.com/supergeek. I didn't remember that they were Genasi. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was useful and helpful and made sense. If you want to support the channel, there are a few ways to do that. You can subscribe and hit the bell. That's the easiest way. You can also support me financially on Patreon. If you support me at $3 a month, you'll be able to participate in my next live stream with patrons. That's going to be on July 17th on Sunday. You can also join the Discord channel where a bunch of people are hanging out and talking about D&D and making characters and making games and sharing rules and suggestions and like making homebrew stuff. It's awesome. And you can also support me by signing up for my newsletter, where I'll keep you up to date with some cool developments whenever they come up. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.